Now, April 24th marks the 7th anniversary of the 2013 Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh, which claimed the lives of over a thousand garment workers. Now, every year at this time, the social activist campaign Fashion Revolution Week shines a spotlight on ethics and sustainability issues in fashion's complex supply chains.
With the industry now thrown into chaos due to the coronavirus, many are applauding a return to a slower fashion system. But this comes at a cost to garment workers. To discuss this and other industry news, we're joined now by fashion journalist Paddy Huntington. Good morning to you, Paddy. Good to see you there this morning with your delightful jacket. Thanks for dressing up for us this morning.
It's just to stay warm. It was about 5 degrees when I looked before.
Yes, good. Stay warm. That's very good to hear. Tell us a bit more about what Fashion Revolution Week is and how is it new and different this year?
Okay, so as you mentioned, the Rana Plaza tragedy in 2013, which some have referred to as fashion's 9/11 in many ways. I mean, there'd been, for decades, there'd been stories, terrible stories about factory disasters and sweatshops. But in this case, a factory collapsed and over 1,100 people died, 2,500 were injured. And, it really kind of laid bare not just the foundations of the shoddily built Rana Plaza factory complex, but also the sort of laissez-faire attitude of the world's biggest brands and retailers that had sort of shifted their manufacturing out of China when the prices there got too high, and the union movement sort of started in China. And I mean, Bangladesh lapped up the business, and in fact, they are now the world's second largest garment exporter after China, and it's 80% of their exports. But there was really no oversight. They didn't really understand or have any sort of comprehension of the safety conditions in the factories or how well built. So, I mean, that really sparked a massive outcry. There was a fire and safety accord that was signed by hundreds of brands and retailers around the world. And in the 1 year anniversary after that, two activists in London launched what they initially called Fashion Revolution Day, which was sort of like a never forget moment. And they asked consumers to take selfies and post it on social media with their garments turned inside out to show the labelling, and asked brands initially with the hashtag Inside Out. They had to change that the following year due to a movie by Disney's Pixar. But now the hashtag is Who Made My Clothes? So, I mean, the focus of Fashion Revolution Week, as it's now called, it expanded into a week-long initiative a couple of years later, is to really put the focus on ethics and sustainability in fashion supply chains with a specific focus on transparency. Now, this year, of course, with COVID-19, there's an additional factor that no one considered, obviously, and that is that approximately $3 billion US dollars in orders have been
Paddy,
cancelled.
we'll just have to interrupt you. I'm afraid we're having a little bit of trouble hearing your audio. We've tried to continue on, but it's just a little bit hard to hear you at the moment. So we'll just leave you there for now and try and re-establish that if we can. So thank you, Paddy, and we'll speak to you shortly.
Earlier this morning, we tried to speak to fashion journalist Paddy Huntington about some of the ways coronavirus is impacting the fashion industry internationally. Let's now chat about what is going on in the Australian fashion industry in response to this pandemic.
Paddy Huntington joins us now from Bowral in New South Wales. Paddy, apologies for cutting you off earlier this morning. We had some audio issues, but let's get back into it now. Let's talk about the We Wear Australian campaign. It's in support of Australian fashion labels that are really struggling at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Fashion Revolution Week. This isn't specifically to do with Fashion Revolution Week at all, but it was launched a week ago. We mentioned that there's been some $3 billion US dollars in orders cancelled from Bangladesh, which is the world's second largest garment producer. And we're not sure how many at this stage, how many Australian retailers or brands are amongst the companies that have sort of said they're not going to those orders. But what we do know in Australia, according to the Australian Fashion Council and others monitoring the situation, is that almost $3 million in orders, wholesale orders from Australian designers have been cancelled by retailers. Some large retailers, it's been reported, David Jones, The Iconic, and pretty much across the board. So this was their resort and their spring-summer collections coming through. So it's left, of course, I mean, they have the various stimulus packages to sort of fall back on. But a consortium of designers have been meeting up via Zoom, which of course everyone is meeting up by at the moment, as many as 60 at a time in what is kind of emerging as an Australian sort of COVID-19 fashion war council. And one initiative was to pool their resources, their promotional resources, and launch a campaign called We Wear Australian. Now, I believe some 30 brands participated in the original campaign a week ago, and within a couple of days, they'd managed to, they're offering discounts on their current stock because, of course, they've been left with all of this stock. They've got no stores to sell it through. Consumers are stuck at home, and they sold almost $500,000 worth of sales, and they're also donating cash or clothing to various charities connected to vulnerable people. They had about an audience of 11 million, I should say, via social media channels of the various brands and the influencers who promoted it. So interesting. Some people in the comments on social media have asked, it may be Australian design, but is it Australian made? And I think this, COVID-19 crisis has really rammed that home. Countries realise how much manufacturing they've dismantled and how much they've got left when they actually need it for things like personal protective equipment. And so, the fashion designers and the brands are trying to get through it as best as they can, and that was one initial idea.
The manufacturing point is certainly a very important point there. And I also like the idea of a fashion war council as well. But Patty, the COVID-19 issue has been making headlines right around the world, but it's also been making international fashion magazines.
Well, of course, the magazines, it's been said, what is the point of a fashion magazine at the moment? It's completely about disposable income and luxury. And in fact, as pretty much every media outlet has been severely impacted by an advertising downturn. In the US alone, some 20,000 people have either been fired or furloughed, as they call it, stood down, or had salary cuts, including even Condé Nast executive Anna Wintour, who's taken a pay cut, bless her heart. But some magazines have responded. There's been some amazing covers. Vogue Portugal had a cover for its April edition with two models kissing with masks on, and I think the tagline on the cover is "Fear will not stop us." GQ Portugal, another Portuguese magazine, had a smiley face and a sort of a rude message to COVID-19. And Vogue Arabia had a number of covers. They didn't do a new cover, but they basically reimagined some of their previous covers with masks on the cover stars for their social media channels. Vogue Italia also did a pure white cover for the first time in its history, I think, in any fashion magazine's history. That was in aid or in support of the healthcare workers, who, of course, have become the frontline heroes across the world.
They're really interesting, those covers, Patty. I reckon they'll go down in history in some sense. Now, people are spending a lot more time on social media and they're trying to connect with each other in different ways, in lighter ways. And what's come out of that is the Pillow Challenge. Tell us about that.
Well, look, fashion shows across the world have been cancelled. There's no Australian Fashion Week. There's nothing that people can watch. So, yes, they are bored in lockdown and quarantine. And it started about a couple of weeks ago, where a couple of influencers posted photos of themselves wearing their favourite pillow belted, as a dress, and others have taken to using other forms of bed linen like duvets and sheets. And it's really quite hilarious. And look, it is a contrast to the tragic news that we've all become so accustomed to waking up to in the morning. The death tolls. The infection rates, the economic impact, the ruin of economies. And so it's something sort of lighthearted. And I've got to say, in many ways, this Pillow Challenge, there's almost 300,000, I think there's over 300,000 posts with either hashtag Quarantine Pillow Challenge or hashtag Pillow Challenge on Instagram alone. And in many ways, this kind of shows that, people didn't stop going to the shops, they didn't stop travelling, they didn't stop going to restaurants because they don't like doing those things. They've had to because of this horrendous pandemic. But, at the end of the day, they really do love to dress up and have a bit of fun and entertain themselves and perform. And look, some of them are really very funny, so I highly recommend people checking them out.
Yeah, we're checking them out right now, actually, while you speak. It's amazing, isn't it, what people can do in their own quiet times.
A bit of fashion inspiration there. Patty, it's great to speak to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.